Shabbat Shalom. As we round the corner of a full year living with the pandemic, this week I found myself spending a good amount of time reflecting on the year. And it was not necessarily the intentional type of reflection that one does in preparation for the high holidays or even at the conclusion of a secular year, but rather the theme of reflection that came in waves and usually took me by surprise. Sitting in my car for a curbside pickup at Loblaws, I remembered my first trip to the grocery store during the initial lockdown in 2020. Watching my young son playing on his mat, I was reminded of the painful reality that he has still not met all of his grandparents. There is some comfort in the fact that so many people are in the same position, but at the end of the day, knowing other people are also struggling does not make me feel any better. In fact, it's just the opposite. With Pesach just around the corner, I found myself reflecting on last year's virtual Seder. How incredibly powerful it was for us to all gather online together, and how I'm genuinely looking forward to this year's virtual Seder as well. And at the same time, how much I miss large dining room tables filled with countless Pesach dishes and friends and family sitting shoulder to shoulder, singing loudly, posing profound questions. I know we will get back there, just not yet. Ultimately, I came to a realization that I'm not entirely proud of, but if you will allow me to be vulnerable and entirely honest with you, I think it's important to name this truth. I find it increasingly challenging to connect with online worship and Jewish rituals. I know for some, this is not the message you want to hear tonight. After all, we have been praying together online for over a year. We have gone through the entire cycle of the Jewish calendar, fulfilling nearly every ritual via Zoom and live stream. And especially now, as we prepare for another virtual Seder happening next week, you would be justified in feeling a little deflated to know that even a member of Holy Blossom's Klei Kodesh can find it challenging to spiritually connect at this time. And I share this with you not to be provocative or disruptive, but because I imagine I am not alone. While this vehicle for worship is really powerful for some, for others, we can be left wanting. The truth is that even when we are able to pray together in person, sometimes people feel that they have not gotten out of the worship service as much as they ought to have gotten out. It is unrealistic for us to expect that every time we attend a service, we will feel as if we've been touched by God, by something higher than ourselves. While we can't expect to have a unique and ineffable experience every time we take part in a service, we can hope for that connection to come readily, or at least more readily than is possible for me via computer or TV screen. Even as I struggle with this spiritual connection, I recognize that there is a great value in joining together virtually with fellow Jews and sharing in the life of the community. The worship service need not be a metaphysical experience in order to be successful. We have to ask ourselves, what should be the outcome of our prayers? As we look to Parshat Vayikra, we find one possible answer in the most unlikely of places: the sacrificial rituals, the korbanot. Now, across the spectrum of Jewish practice, rabbis and cantors and Jewish educators tend to introduce this section of the Torah with an acknowledgement of its challenges. Leviticus is, simply put, inaccessible without proper context. It is primarily a book dedicated to the rituals of the sacrificial priestly cult, and there should be no surprise that the descriptions of the temple cult strike us as alien or repellent in today's world. We accept that it describes practices that we find gory rituals impossible to perform in a world lacking both a central temple in Jerusalem and a priesthood. We accept that we are far more comfortable sitting around a Seder table than an altar. And we know that animal sacrifice was practiced among nearly every single primitive religion in the Middle East. And in the pagan rituals, the offerings were meant to please and win the favor of the pagan gods. This form of worship was entirely for the benefit of their perceived deities. Now, biblical Israel was never entirely free from the cultural influences in which it developed. However, we can see that there is a fundamental difference in the purpose of the Israelite sacrifice. It was entirely different than our ancient neighbors. And this is most apparent through the nature of the Hebrew word for offering, korban. Stemming from the Hebrew root kuf resh bet, korban means to draw near. The purpose of the Israelite sacrificial system was not its effect upon God, not an attempt to please Adonai with pleasant odors or delicious food, but rather for what it did for the person making the offering, how it enabled them to draw near to God. Maimonides famously explained sacrifices as imperfect but necessary. The Rambam is teaching us that the sacrificial system was simply a placeholder until the Israelite people were able to handle the abstract idea of prayer. What began in elaborate temple rituals administered by a priest on behalf of an offerer transformed into prayer. And at its best, the modern-day worship service is a pattern that enables Jews to draw near to God in any age, in any place, in any time, and to strive to live a life of holiness. We are not offering prayers because God needs our prayers or our praise, but rather because it enables us to draw near to God's presence. Which leads us back to the question, what should we do when we find the vehicle of online prayer under-providing for our spiritual needs? Our rabbis were aware that because we have structured our service, it would be easy to fall into a routine repetition of prayer, that we may struggle with spiritual connection. They warned us against this, saying, "When you pray, do not let your prayer become routine, but let it be a sincere supplication." And as each generation in the past has brought its own insights to the text, it is also for us to bring our own deepest thoughts and hopes, our dreams, and even our fears as we confront prayer. It is my hope that by naming our struggle, naming my struggle to find spirituality, our prayers can begin to address that very concern, that perhaps there is beauty in praying for the ability to pray more deeply. I want to conclude tonight with some of the most prayerful words I have read in recent months. In celebration of his 101st birthday on March 9th, the father of our members Susan and David Baskin, Rabbi Bernard Baskin, wrote a reflection entitled, "The Masks We Wear." With strength of spirit, Rabbi Baskin writes, "Which is your favorite mask? We've got trunks full of them. The more honest we become about ourselves, the more impressed we are with the devious facades behind which our emotions are prone to conceal themselves." Rabbi Baskin continues, "Let us go one step further and suggest that masks can even enhance our lives. We can grow in mind and spirit if we learn to wear the mask of human beings we admire, not in order to pretend to be what we are not, but rather as a means of aspiring to what we can become. Do you want to become kinder and more sympathetic? Then assume the pose of the kindly and sympathetic person. Do you want to become more understanding and merciful? Then don the masks of understanding and mercy. In our quest for spiritual connection, may we learn from Rabbi Baskin the strength required and the power that derives from being open and honest with each other and with ourselves. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Shabbat Shalom.